Hey guys, welcome back to Through Their Eyes. This is Season 3, Episode 5, and we have the privilege of having with us Wayne Rogers, as always, our Director of Programming. Wayne, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
That's it? Really?
That's it.
Okay. And also we have Joey Farrell. Joey, this is your first time being on the podcast with us as far as I know. Thank you for being here. Go ahead and introduce the work that you're doing and what it is that you do and anything about you want on record right now.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I work with the Gospel of Christ. I'm the Director of Operations, which means that I stand behind the camera, do negotiations for TV stations, and just whatever is required, do a little fundraising, get out and visit with churches all over the country. And so just really enjoy that. Been preaching since 2009. Still feel like I'm a young preacher, even though I'm getting as much gray hair as Wayne.
Yeah, that happens, man.
It ain't gray no more. Gandalf the White over here. Well, we're trying to do, this is an apt introduction since we're doing advice to my younger self. When I turned 30 last year, my wife bought me one gift just for men. And it was not long after she had bought that I had been getting my hair cut, and the lady that's been cutting my hairs for so many years said, "You're getting some gray hairs." So I fired her, and now I've got a new one. No, she retired, but younger self, that we all want a do-over. That's the theme of this season is, if I could get a do-over, what would it be? And so, Joey, my job is to ask you questions 1 and 3. Wayne's going to ask you 2 and 4, okay, and then we'll close it out. But we're not looking for anything, waxed poetic or anything of that nature, eloquent speech. It's just a matter of, what would it be? What would the advice be at this stage to the next? And so it's very laid back, but we also look forward to scheduling you to be on another episode of Through Their Eyes in the future and getting a little bit more, diving deeper into a passage in that regard. But if you had the ability to give advice to yourself as a child from, age 3rd grade to 8th grade, what would that advice be?
Well, I'm going to introduce that 3rd grade to 8th grade. I'm going to introduce the answer to that a little differently, probably, because I didn't go to the 8th grade. I went to the 9th grade instead. I was always a little bit older than my classmates, and so that was that's an interesting transitional time there. But I will say this: I was baptized into Christ in 3rd grade, and so I was very young, and a lot of people don't understand that when you find out a young person has been baptized. I might have been in 4th grade, but I was just barely right underneath 10 years old. Now, I want to share something with that because I'm going to give advice to myself, but I'm also going to give advice to those who are encouraged by seeing these types of baptisms and things like that. The congregation where we worshiped and where I was baptized at, first off, the preacher there, Lyndall Doty, would not baptize me until he knew that I knew. And I'm happy for that. But also, as soon as I was baptized, I was in a Thursday night future preachers class. And that is some great advice to congregations, to elders, to deacons, to preachers, to find a way to do that with your new converts, not just the young men, but the new converts, and to challenge them to learn what to do in leadership in the church. Now, the advice I would give myself would be, don't stop going, because I did. Sometime later I'd started playing more sports and sitting on the bench most likely, but I stopped going, and I wish I had not, because honestly there were probably 12 to 14 men of different ages in that group that would meet every Thursday night. And I know of at least 3 to 4 of them who have become preachers out of that, so including myself. And so that would be the best bit of advice I can give to my youngest self. And then as we grow up through that next age point, would be to be kind and understanding. I had an accident when I was 11 years old, just months before I turned 12. It was a very serious automobile accident. And had to spend a lot of time out of school, had to have skin grafts, surgeries. I became the weird kid on the school bus. And so I was the recipient, I guess, of quite a bit of bullying, and, had to sit in a certain seat and and had to have help getting on and off the bus some and things like that. And so my advice to myself then would be to forgive those people better than what I did.
Yeah, that's certainly a struggle, one that I cannot relate to in that regard of being in an accident and then having to deal with all of that. But kids can be some of the most cruel and vicious and just downright evil in some of the ways that they talk to other children.
Yeah,
I mean, if we were going to have to listen to some of the things we probably said when we were kids to other kids in front of any elderships, we would probably say, is there any way we could not play that, please? Or I've changed. I'm not that guy anymore, because we can sometimes just be so mean and vicious. I certainly like what you said. I'll speak to it for just a moment on my own experience about the young men's training. I'm a product of preaching simply and primarily because of that. You know, that my congregation at South Haven was dedicated to giving the fifth Sundays to the young men. And every time I'd get done, you know, there's some sweet elderly lady that says, you're going to make a great gospel preacher. And I found one of those videos on YouTube. I had a buzzed head, and I preached a sermon that was 9 minutes long. And I was watching that cackling. I mean, I was laughing, thinking, and I thought this was preaching, you know, this. And I hope that 20 years from now I find a sermon that I'm doing now and go, wow, okay, guy.
Well, but
Easy.
let me add, though, that at 53 years old, I had an older lady tell me recently that I was going to make a good preacher.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah, it's pretty humbling. I had, in my first work, there was a lady, she was probably in her mid-80s, you know, she goes, one day you're going to make a fine preacher. You know, maybe it's not today.
Yes.
It's not today, but one day. So there's always hope.
Absolutely. Well,
Yes, absolutely.
but churches have stopped doing that, and not all of them, but a lot of them have. And I wonder if part of the reason we have such a preacher shortage in our brotherhood right now is we've stopped not idolizing, but showing some respect to the position of, you know, a preaching minister, you know, someone who is a pulpit preacher and working with congregations. You know, our children need to grow up thinking that is the greatest profession they could have. If they hear mom and dad always bashing and talking down, they're not going to want to do that. Why would they want it? So I appreciate what you said about that for sure.
Yeah. We moved to transition toward our teenage years, and things just seem to compound to get even more difficult. And children can be even, you know, teenagers can be even more cruel than young children.
Absolutely.
And you know, it's a tough, difficult phase. A lot of our young people that, you know, we have teenagers that listen to the program as well too. So especially kind of speaking, you know, to young teenager Joey, but also teenagers that might be listening in, what advice would you give?
Well, from that age group of that ninth grade, I guess, or that junior high to high school toward adult were probably some of my roughest years. And I say that in all sincerity because they're, again, coming off of, as I mentioned, I skipped the 8th grade, so my maturity level wasn't quite ready for that. And so it put me from, you know, my friends in the 7th grade to now I have a whole new set of friends, not only in school but also in the church, because now I've moved up into the youth group instead of the kids group and things like that. And so it certainly caused some challenges in those years. Some of those challenges would equate to, you know, listening to what the others said and thinking, oh, it's not that bad. That sin's not really, it's not bad to curse, you know. It's okay. You know, even up to the age of 16 when I first started my first job, working at the Sonic Drive-In, and you know, I've got friends there that are, you know, their language is not becoming and their actions are not becoming, and they're doing things after work and before work that we shouldn't be doing, not even just as Christians, but at all. And I remember very, very effectively one of the bad things, I tell on myself a little bit, but they would work me to death in that kitchen, that hot kitchen, because everybody else got a smoke break. Well, guess what Joey didn't do? Joey didn't smoke until Joey said, well, if they get a break, I'm going to too. And so my advice to that age is don't let peer pressure take you under.
Yeah.
And it will continue to do that. And also in that same age time, I was working a lot. I was working at restaurants and had to miss the worship services at times. And, I'll encourage any young person, tell your bosses if you're working a job that you're not going to work on Sundays and Wednesday nights. Mm-hmm. If they will not allow that, then maybe you ought to look for a different job.
Yeah.
You're a teenager. You're not focusing on making your living, I hope.
Yeah, it's not a career move yet.
Yeah, it's not a career-minded position there. And I share that to say that the youth group that I was in at the time, not the same congregation that I was in, the Future Preachers, I should have stayed there, but the congregation there, the youth group was very large and very influential on each other. We did a lot of things together. Well, I had to miss a lot of those because I was working. Mm-hmm. And I had a youth minister that was very discouraging to me one Sunday morning and embarrassed me in front of the youth group because I had my uniform on for work, and he said some things. And I told him that day, I said, I won't be back. And he said, oh, we'll see you next Sunday. Now, I share that to say that he didn't see me next Sunday, and neither did any church doors for a while, because I would leave my house telling my parents I was going to a friend's to go to church with them, and I wouldn't. I'd go fishing. I'd go to McDonald's and eat, and I'd come back later and change clothes. And so that carried on for a little while, but, as time progressed, and that probably goes into the next question of the early, not really the early 20s, but I was fortunate to grow up in an area where there were multiple churches there, multiple congregations of the Lord's Church. And a lot of my friends were Christians, and it only took one to invite me to their congregation one Sunday night. And when I walked in the door, they were very welcoming. The preacher there, Tony Lawrence, he asked my name. He was very young, by the way. He didn't have gray hair then either. And he asked my name. And at the end of the service, he called me by name, with a 300-plus member congregation. And that meant something. And to my knowledge, I've not missed over a couple of Sundays in a row, except for work-related incidents since that time. So I encourage you young people, don't let the crowds take you away from church, whether it be that they pull you away or they push you away. If you're not comfortable in the setting you're in, ask your parents to help you find one that is.
Love it.
Certainly, we said this on another episode, being a teenager, you make decisions that carry over into adulthood, but adults are not exempt from making some foolish decisions. No. All three of us on this podcast could tell numerous stories as to the foolishness that we have done in our own lives and the decisions we've made. But what advice, if you had the ability to go back and give advice to yourself as an adult from age 20 to now, Joey, would you give?
Well, as you are a young father, that's probably where the advice would go. Be more involved with your kids, not just in a church setting. Of course, as I mentioned, I've only been preaching since 2009, so my kids were practically, one was almost grown and the other 9 years old when I started preaching one Sunday a month. So we weren't as focused on quote church things unquote as we should have been in my household, and that's probably one of the biggest regrets, that if I could go back and sit down with my wife and say, look, we've got to establish something here. I traveled a lot during those years, not for the church like I travel now, but for my work, and I was staying in hotels 4 out of 5 nights of the week, and so when I would come home on a Friday night, it was pretty much I was out. I was done, and then had to get back up early Monday morning and go right back at it. So we, it was a blessing to be able to worship with my family most Sundays, but that was it. That's all I had. And so I'm thankful that my children are faithful, but at the same time, I feel like I could have helped them be better Christians than they were able to be under my care.
Sure.
When I think about, you talked about the work you've been doing with the gospel of Christ and preaching, and I think we probably all started filling the pulpit in other locations, getting those opportunities to do that.
Sure.
But in the work of a preacher and thinking about, I know my early years preaching, I got a lot I want to say to that early, that time period, that Wayne. But you might have some advice too you want to share. So
yes, absolutely. The first thing is don't criticize yourself too much. The first real sermon that I preached was on the word no, and I thought for sure, or not, it will not kill you, so to speak. And I thought, one day, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I went back and looked for my notes on my sermons, and I used to keep all my notes and don't keep them as much now. I think that maybe helps me freshen up a little bit. But I went back and I plugged in the notes that I had for that sermon into the method that I would use today to write a sermon. Same notes, 31 pages of manuscript for that sermon. And I'm thinking, what in the world was I doing? I don't know how long that sermon went. I have no idea. It might have been 7 minutes. I don't know. But if it was, then probably nobody understood it. But I can't look back at that and criticize myself for that. As a minister, as a preacher, I think we can be way too critical on ourselves. If you don't hear hey, that was a good lesson at the door. One of the thoughts that Michael had talked to me a little bit about, did that really happen? There was a older lady at that congregation where I preached at, and it never failed. If I went past the 27-minute mark in a sermon, and my typical sermon was right at 35 minutes then. If I went past 27 minutes, she would get her car keys out and sit there and shh, 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 and you could hear her from all the way in the back row.
Wow.
Now, with that said, that lady told me one day, I had been preaching there about 2 years, and she told me, she said, "You don't know the Bible." And that was hard, but she was right. And so, I pushed down and pressed harder. And that's about the time that I started at Heritage Christian to improve, because I had no formal training whatsoever. I just had training at the feet of good men,
Yeah.
And so I tried and I pressed on. I took notes. I started diving into Scripture a little better. Trying to learn some of the better methods of not memorizing Bible, because I'm too old for that, but learning how to find passages better, things like that. It wasn't too long after that, a year or two later, that she was in the nursing home and about to pass away, and she asked me to come. And so don't be too critical on yourself as a preacher. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, and you've heard this before, you'll hear it again, don't quit on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Did that. Needed to, honestly, but it wasn't the right time. And so, don't quit on a Sunday. Don't let your emotions get the best of you. Certainly can do that. And then also, probably the third and probably the hardest thing that I've seen, being that I've mostly served bivocationally, is don't compare yourself to anybody else. I was speaking to a man back here just a minute ago. His name is Adam. That's all I'll give on this podcast, because y'all need to probably have him do a podcast for you. But Adam is not a preacher. He is a man that was imprisoned for 12 years for nothing. He didn't do it. But he has probably brought more souls to Christ than I can ever imagine. Through his study, through his effort, through his talking and teaching to them. And I told him yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I said, you need to go to one of these preaching schools and learn how to be a preacher. Mm-hmm. He said, I'm not a preacher. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm not either. And so he said today, I am a preacher, but I'm not a pulpit preacher. And so we can't compare ourselves to everyone else. We can't look at somebody and say, oh, well, look, they're on, 14 different lectureships and they've got all this work going on. They've got these many baptisms and things like that. One soul is all it's worth. One soul. That's if you can reach one soul with whatever your work is in the Lord's church, reach it. That's it.
That's good.
Joey, thank you so much. I know that we met years ago, long time ago. Was that Grootley Lager?
Yes, your first gospel meeting, I believe.
And had the chance to get to know each other then, and then TBH, back
Yes.
when that was happening. I remember being so mad at Joey because he assigned me, why do I feel this way? Depression.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to feel this way after I'm done studying on it. But true to form, how it often goes, that lesson has been one of the more impactful lessons I've ever studied and put together that helped my own ministry, because now when someone says they're feeling and struggling, I say, hey, I wrote this based on some books that were found and other things, and also the scriptures, maybe it'll help. And so sometimes the greatest things that happen are the ones that you don't assign yourself. And also now getting to see each other at a lot of these conference events. And Wayne will start joining that mix too with 416. So I'm excited that we're all doing what we're doing, grateful for you with the gospel of Christ and doing all that's going, and hopefully onwards and upwards and greater things. We'll have your information down in the show notes. And Wayne, you have anything that you want to kind of close out with? Or
Joey, let me just say I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.
I appreciate you sticking in there and continuing to preach and continuing doing the work you're doing. And I think it's great. I appreciate the gospel of Christ and the programs that are out there, man. Y'all are getting it done. And so I think that's wonderful. And I'm excited that, we get to kind of showcase some of that, and give that opportunity for people to get to know you a little bit, think about some of those things. And you've always been very kind and personable and easy to hang out with, and so I appreciate that about you. So,
well, early on this season, we had the very first episode with Larry Acuff, a new program that we're kind of teasing. Thought we'd give it a chance. We're going to let it air on Did That Really Happen the first few times. Feel like the audience will tell us if it's good or not. It's called This or That. It's a game that I played at camp where different subjects are put together and you play and you argue basically about which you rather would have. And so this Thursday we'll have the second of those that we've done. And we, Bradley, go find Larry Acuff. Thank you. Bradley's on one of those This or That's. Did a great job. Looking forward to having that air. But, Joey, we appreciate it. We're going to get you back on Through Their Eyes and Did That Really Happen again in the future. And thank y'all so much for listening. Hopefully, you enjoyed this podcast. And if you enjoy what we're doing, you can find all of our information down in the show notes below, as well as all of our podcasts on every major platform. Until then, take care and God bless.